everybody, and welcome to Eat My Globe, a podcast about things you didn't know about food. Now, those of you who are long-term listeners will know that alongside regular episodes, I like to invite in sometimes experts and sometimes kind of my mates from the Food Network to have a chat with me, and I sometimes set them a challenge. Well, today, I've got someone who's both an incredible expert at his profession and also someone I know really well from the Food Network and I know you all admire. Now, usually I go into a long introduction about this person, but this person is so well known that for me to do that, I think would be dumb for you and it'd be really insulting for him. So can I just introduce you to the man who made me my first ever s'more, my only ever s'more, the one and only Mr. Duff Goldman. Hello, mate.
Hey, how's it going?
It is going really well. I am so thrilled that you're joining me, not only because I know you're so busy all the time and you're always running around, but we don't get to see each other very often. I always say to people, because they think if we do Food Network stuff, that we all see each other all the time. We kind of ride around in a minivan solving mysteries together.
We all live in one big house. You know?
Yep, that's it, like the monkeys. and we don't. So it's actually, this is a real thrill for me just to kind of get to see you.
I don't think I've seen you since my wedding.
I don't think we have actually seen each other since your wedding. I mean, we've swapped texts and all of that kind of nonsense, but we haven't seen each other. So to see you on here with your rather wonderful beanie, and we'll put the picture up on Instagram. So I'm really super excited that you came on to take part in what I like to do is my little culinary challenge. Are you up for a little challenge?
Yeah. Let's hear it.
I know you are. So what I often do is I go to people when they come on and I say, I want you to name 5 people to join the culinary pantheon, to be restored, as it were, to the culinary pantheon. People who may have been forgotten, people who people may not know, but have done something really remarkable, but have been lost to the kind of annals of history. And obviously with you, what I did was I said, well, you know, people from the history of baking, that's what you've got to know. You obviously know more about that than probably just about anybody else on this planet. And I'm sure you know lots of people. So I suggested you come up with 5 kind of possible candidates to go into the Eat My Globe Culinary Pantheon. So have you had a chance to think about this? And if you did, what kind of criteria? What would you do? So how would you even begin such a process? Because there's hundreds of them you could put in there.
Well, you know, there's so much. I mean, I think, you know, one thing you got to do is start to kind of separate, you know, the myth from the reality, you know, because there's a lot of things, you know, you hear like bagels, for example. You know, the story that I've heard was that they were invented by the Polish bakers to celebrate. Oh man, I forget a Stanislaus or one of those Eastern European, you know, kind of Holy Roman Empire sounding names of some guy who was like really into horses. And so the bakers in Warsaw made bagels to be the shape, you know, in the shape of his stirrup, and that was how bagels were invented. I don't buy it.
It's that I did some research into this myself once. I will tell you, the letters B and the letters S come into play pretty quickly on that one. I will just say it is one of those great urban myths up there with, you know, prisoners in Massachusetts rioted because they ate too much lobster, or you know, it's your Marco Polo brought pasta back from China. All kind of culinary lies that are great fun.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping that the rest of your suggestions are a little better than that. Otherwise, this is going to be a bit of a damp squib, mate.
Sure. Well, so okay. So my first one, I don't know who this person would be. I don't know his or her name. I don't know, you know, but I do know that they come from the Fertile Crescent. And these would be the first kind of Neolithic, you know, people that baked bread. And I think that these were the very, very first people. Now, they were actually, I don't know, let's call them Og, right? It's a good name for a.
Oh, it's you could be a man or a woman.
Right? Maybe you live in it. Maybe you're a troglodyte. Maybe you live in some kind of settlement. Who knows? But the people, I would say the very first people that started harvesting grain and turning it into something good. And I think that was probably, 11,000 years ago. I think they found, I was just reading about this. They found little pieces of flatbread about 11, 12,000 years ago in the Fertile Crescent, where they were I think this was even before we were actually practicing agriculture, but these were harvesting wild grains, crushing them up and turning them into bread, which I think is
so this is almost before the first communities started being developed. People were making two things that I've seen anyway: bread and beer. And the big argument right now was beer first or was bread first? Did one lead to the other? You have this argument that sometimes people had bread, it got hard, they left water on it overnight to soften it, it kind of fermented a bit. They drank that water and went, "Ooh, that's nice." And they kind of got the very proto beer. The other side of it was that they had the beer, and it was more like a porridge than the beers that we would know today. And then they started eating that yeasty kind of solid bit at the bottom, and that was the beginning of bread. So there's this kind of both sides. So first of all, let's talk about it from beer or bread. Which side of it would you come down? I'm guessing I know which, given what you do for a living.
Well, I would definitely say the bread. I think that, I think like fermenting grains, in order to drink them, in order to get a buzz, I think probably came later. I feel like that's a secondary, a secondary sort of need that we have, but like first we need to just eat, so I think we had these grains, like, what do we do with them? Let's crush them up, mix them with some water, put it in the fire and see what we get. Oh, that's nice. We'll eat that. And then, I think somebody probably left it around. But I don't know. I mean, like, what about sourdough? It's sort of it's skating that line in between bread and beer. So, yeah, I'm going to say bread. I think bread came first.
I think I would probably still go down the bread route. But let's talk about the type of bread that they had then. What's the process? You imagine you get grains, you find the wild, and you go, and that's my Neanderthal for you. And what happens between that and the magnificent breads that everyone's been baking? We're filming this during pandemic. What's the notion between that and all these incredible breads that you make and everyone makes, but seeing that grain and taking that to another kind of level where you realize it's something kind of edible? What do you imagine that process would have been like? Because you're obviously playing with these ingredients all the time.
Well, I think, they probably started to have to, they probably just started eating them, right? Right off the stalk. It's a grass. And, their wheat did not look like our wheat. It's very different. But I think that, all basic cereal grains and grasses kind of look the same. So I would imagine that they were probably eating them. And probably the first thing they were doing was drying them out and realizing that there's a bran, there's a husk that they would have to get rid of. So they would have to thresh the wheat, get rid of the husk, and that exposes the germ and the endosperm. And that's where you get, flour from, and I think that, they were probably, the first thing they were doing was just grinding this stuff up and turning it into something that they could eat. When the grains are whole, I don't know if you ever tried like eating like just a wheat berry, but it's not great. You got to do a lot to it. You got to cook it down, cook it like a porridge, or something like that. But I think that, they were grinding stuff, 15,000 years ago, 16,000 years ago, they found, grindstone. So I think that they knew that they had to grind things down just to be able to process them just as, as people, because I don't think that they were like, their cooking was that sophisticated that they were like able to make like, a really good shrimp and grits,
I have to say, even though part of me thinks it's a slight cheat to have an other from history as to go into the culinary pantheon. I guess almost you can think of it like the unknown soldier. It's like someone who did something great in the past that changed the way we ate. And bread obviously is so fundamental to most civilizations, to the Romans who gave it away, bread and circuses to stop riots, to, the free breads that they gave away in Britain during medieval times. It's so fundamental that the first people who discovered that, for want of a better way of putting it, I think are definitely in the culinary pantheon. So 1-0, good job.
I think also, you might want to maybe put another sort of unknown hero to put in there would be the first person to ever eat a snail, because who looked at a snail and was like, I'm going to eat that.
Well, I guess that's with a lot of things that I always think of that, when you see certain dishes from around the world and you think, how the heck did they come up with that? It's like the rotten shark meat in Iceland that they bury and then you eat it and this thing smells like death. But you go, at some point, some Viking thought, this was a great idea. So with bread, it's a fairly safe one. It's not like someone got something really weird. So I think that's a really terrific start. So, but then I think we go on a little bit into kind of a bit more into recorded time for your next one, don't we?
Yeah. I would say, so for the next one, I'm going to say, this is really exciting. So when I started baking, I was in college, and when I was working in this restaurant called Savannah, and there was a little like a prayer card that somebody years ago had taped to the oven. And it was this prayer card for Saint Honoratus, Saint Honore. Mm-hmm. And I was like, what is this? I mean, I'm Jewish, I don't really, have a lot of saints in my life, So I started doing some research, and it turns out that Saint Honore is the patron saint of bakers and pastry chefs. And I think that he's a great one for the pantheon. He's got a cake. He's got a cake named after him that was put together by the Chaboost bakery, I think in the 1800s, where like Chaboost, which, creme Chaboost was named for, was, invented at the Chaboost bakery, Paris. And Saint Honore's, there was a church in Paris that was sponsored by a very wealthy baker. And this was in, I believe, the 1300s. And this is how Saint Honore became the patron saint of bakers and pastry chefs. He's a pretty important guy. And, he definitely belongs there. And a Gâteau Saint Honore is delicious.
Well, we're going to talk about the cake in a moment, because I know he watches over all of you. I'm a great believer, coming from an Episcopalian, high Episcopalian background, great believer in your saints and what they do for us. So I'm not sure I have a patron saint, but I'm pretty sure they're out there. Now, the things I liked about him, first of all, great pastry chef, and he was from Gaul. He was from France. So, I mean, I think it's a French connection with pastry, I think, starts at the very beginning, because he was around in about the 3rd, 4th century. So we're talking someone very early on in the kind of history of Christianity. And so I like that fact about him. What I like about it is he was in a battle to become the patron saint of bakers. I don't know if you know this. So there were 2 people who were up to be the patron saint of bakers. One was Saint Honoratus, and the other was Saint Lazare. Now, this is a really interesting one. Patron bakers, the one disease that they were really, see, I love this. I'm telling something to a baker now about bakeries, but this wasn't about the actual cooking process. The one thing they were really subject to, when in the 17th century, 18th century, when he became a saint, was they were subject to leprosy. That was a big thing with bakers in France and Paris, particularly in that period. And so Saint Lazare was also the patron saint of lepers. And so they wanted to choose him. And there was actually a big kind of ruction about it. Which of these 2 would go and be the patron saint of bakers? But then what happened was, when Saint Lazare apparently was buried, I'm not making this up. I can see you giving me this quizzical look. Mm-hmm. When he was buried, he was partly carried, one of his robes was carried on a baker's paddle, which fell into the ground and stuck. And the kind of myth is that it sprouted and became a tree. And it may have been where the church was then later built. And that also, on the day he died, which was during a huge drought, obviously death to all bakers, because it poured with rain and the drought ended. So that was kind of what they decided in the end. And then I think it was in 1659, he won, and Saint Lazare stayed just as the patron saint of lepers. So I love these stories because the history of the battles, and people fought over this. I mean, literally fought in the streets over who the bakers, which one. Then they were obviously given that we're recording this and we're coming up to an election, given that they're fighting over this, they would do it probably the same way. So that's interesting. But now I've dropped a little bit of history in there.
I'd love a lot to unpack there. Hold on. First of all, there is a lot in why there. Were the bakers getting leprosy?
I think it was one of those that had caught on and we can talk about this in COVID, in a certain very tightly knit area. And what was happening is it was just going between the bakers because they were so closely compacted and because it was a touchable disease. And so if you touched a paddle or you went into flour mill or you went into it was spreading just particularly amongst this community. It was the baker's disease at this particular point. So luckily you don't have that now when you're filming, which is great.
Right. Yeah. I haven't seen leprosy in a while. Now the other thing is what I read was that Saint-Honoré was came from a wealthy family, and he had there was household staff, there was a major domo, there was butlers, there was this kind of thing, and he had a cook. There was a cook in the house, and when Saint-Honoré was they were trying to make him the Archbishop of Reims or Amiens, something like that.
Amiens, I think it
Amiens,
was,
right? And so the cook said, I don't believe it, that not him. And if God wanted him to be the Archbishop of Amiens, she had a baker, she had a peel, a wooden. She said God could turn this back into a tree. She stuck it in the ground and it turned into a mulberry tree. That's what I heard.
Which is, either way, great stories. But before we move on from him then, it is probably 25 years since I last had the cake named after him. Yeah. So can you, for people who haven't tried it, I remember it with great glee from a trip to Paris. But can you tell me a little bit about how you would make it and what it is? Because I love hearing you talk about cakes because it just makes me feel like I'm eating them.
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask you to talk about lots of food during this as well.
Great. I love it. So now a gâteau Saint-Honoré is not like a traditional cake. It's so a gâteau Saint-Honoré, what they do is you roll out some puff pastry, and then you cut a circle, however big you want the cake to be, is the base of it, and then you pipe pâte à choux around onto the puff pastry, and then you bake the whole thing. The puff pastry bakes, and then also the pâte à choux bakes, and they bake at the same time. And then the pâte à choux that's stuck is sort of there. You have this sort of pastry shell, and then you fill that shell with crème chabouste, which is crème pâtissier pastry cream folded with traditionally meringue. But
wow,
now most crème chabouste in the States and sort of in modern era is pastry cream just folded with whipped cream. But it's a little more stable when you do it with a nice meringue. It's like a really high ratio of sugar. And then you pipe more pâte à choux into cream puffs, bake them off, fill them with the crème chabouste, and then dip them into caramel, hot sugar, and then just like you would with a croquembouche, you dip them in the sugar and you stick them onto the cake with the hot sugar, and so
just build it up.
Yeah, so it's like this crunchy, it's got like the hard sugar and the pastry and the puff pastry and the creme chabouste, which is delicious. One of my favorite of the classical French creams.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I may have to stop now and just go and have a moment in another room. That's fantastic. Those great cakes. I can't. I'm going to have to try and find one.
I love
Probably
French pastries. I just love French pastry, man.
You know what I love about French pastries is they're so unapologetic. Do you know what I mean? It's like there's no, they go, you're eating a cake. There's no, it's not naughty. It's just like, it's indulgent. And you can imagine being kind of Louis the 16th sitting kind of, on his bed, on his chaise longue, being fed, choux pastries filled with whatever. I mean, it has got that indulgence to it. And the way you describe it, but also the amount of technique that goes into every level of that. There's no way you could do that unless you have real training. You can't play at that.
Yeah, you really do. Even if you know how to make puff pastry, which is pretty difficult, and you know how to make pâte à choux, still baking those things together. They both start out at a really high temperature, and then you want to turn the temperature down so you dry them out and they get really, really crispy. But baking those things together requires a very deft hand and a good knowledge just of your oven, to really know what you're doing.
Wow. Oh, yeah, definitely not something I can do with my very, very rough puff. I shall quickly blitz over that. Let's go. Yeah, no, please don't. Yeah, I know my baking is, yes, it's sad. But we're going to have a row now.
Okay.
Hi everybody, this is Simon Majumdar, the creator and host of the Eat My Globe Food History podcast. Now, those of you who have been listening to the podcast since we began over 2 years ago, nearly 50 episodes so far, will know that we have never sought out sponsorship for the podcast. It's very much been a labour of love. However, along the way, a large number of people have approached us suggesting they would like to support the podcast. And so, we have opened up a page on patreon.com to allow those of you who listen regularly to do just that. Any support we will get will allow us to purchase research materials, buy ingredients for recipes, and maybe, when we can get out and about, to bring you some very special in-the-field reporting. But, and this is really important, this is not just a one-way street. For varying levels of membership of our Patreon club, there will be access to fantastic Eat My Globe swag, including that incredible chopping board so many of you have written to me about, recipes based on historical periods about which we chat each week, video shout-outs, signed pictures, and even along the way some very special episodes just for members. So, if you've enjoyed the episodes of Eat My Globe you've listened to so far and would like us to make many more into the future, do head over to www.patreon.com/eatmyglobe and consider taking out a membership. Any support will be much appreciated. Remember, that's www.patreon.com/eatmyglobe. So thank you very much. Keep listening. We're going to have a row over your next one. Not because the person you've chosen, who I think was obviously a person of good renown, but because of what it started, something that I really, well, maybe we won't have a row, something I really dislike, something that just the whole concept of annoys me.
But
on that good start, why don't you? Well, I don't think with this particular item anybody really won. Ugh. But anyway, I've started you off from that very low point. Why don't you tell us what your number 3?
Okay, so my number 3 is Amelia Simmons, who wrote the very first American cookbook. Right now, I think it's really exciting. First of all, I need to pull up the full name Do you have it there? The full name of the cookbook?
It's called American Cookery on the Art of Making Viands, Fish, Poultry, and Vegetables, and the best modes of making puff pastries, pies, tarts, puddings, custards, and preserves, and all kinds of cakes, from the imperial plum to plain cake, adapted to this country and all grades of life.
It's so good. It's so grandiose. You know,
and your new book is Kids Baking.
Kids Baking.
You should be ashamed of yourself.
No,
you weren't even trying.
It's called Super Good.
But now the reason you're mentioning her is why I think we're not going to have a row. We won't row, but we'll have a little. You gave me my first ever some more. I'm never going to row with you, but she gave a recipe for one thing, and it's more the concept of this thing that drives me bananas, and particularly was very much in fashion when I first moved to the US about 10 years ago. Do you know what? So what was that recipe?
Cakes baked in little cups.
Yeah. A light cake to bake in small cups. The cupcake. The cursed cupcake. Now, which side are you on the cupcake battle?
I hate cupcakes.
Oh no, we're mates then. That's good. I thought we were going to have a right old Barney, but no.
I hate cupcakes. It's not that I don't hate. How can you hate a cupcake? It's just like, all right, come on. You know, I mean, here's the thing. I can't hate like cupcakes. One of the nice things about cupcakes is that it's one of the things that really gets people interested in baking. It's one of the first things that, you know, kids can do, and they can start with a cupcake. It's relatively easy. You know, they're pretty forgiving. And your cupcakes can really evolve, and you can do really wonderful and cute things with them. And it's great. It's great. I'm just over it.
Tell people, you know, who may have blanked the memory of the great cupcake invasion, as it were, from their memories, that about 10 years ago when I came over here to the US to move here for the first time, and I remember being taken by my lovely wife to a cupcake store that had an ATM dispensing cupcakes.
Yeah.
I mean, where did all of this start? Why did people suddenly get into this big cupcake mode? There were TV shows. Sex in the City.
Sex in the City. So Sex in the City had the Magnolia Bakery on it, right? Magnolia Bakery in New York City, which is a fantastic bakery, by the way.
Yes, it is. I've been there.
Fantastic bakery. They had these cupcakes from Magnolia, and then it just became, from there, it was like a thing. Cupcakes. So it was like this whole thing, and it was like super cute, and everyone's like cupcakes. And they evolved. I mean, they really got kind of ornate, you know, cupcakes got a little crazy, and they're very packageable, and they're stylish, and you can do all kinds of flavors, and you can fill them with things. And the nice thing about a cupcake, it's like, you know, it's start to finish. You know, it's like, you know, if you're going to listen to an album, you know, that's like, you know, like reading a whole book. You know, that's like, you know, listening to an album is like getting a cake, right? But, you know, now we don't download albums anymore. We download songs, right? And so a cupcake's like a song, start to finish. There it is. I got it. Cupcake.
It's like 5 minutes, and you would get a tray with about 8 different types with all kind of swirls, and they were pretty. And what I found, this was the crazy thing I always found about cupcakes, even from really good places, they all ended up tasting the same. I'd like take a bite of this, and they were supposed to have a bit of flavor here and a bit, and I was like, maybe I'm just missing it. But in the end, they all just tasted of sugar to me. They were so sweet and so over the top.
So a lot of times what's happening with cupcakes is that people are making an American buttercream, right? So it's basically just butter and powdered sugar whipped together, a little bit of milk, a little bit of vanilla, a little bit of salt. But, you know, that's basically it. And what people were finding is that the more sugar that they would add to the butter, the stiffer it would become. And so the kind of the less susceptible to fingerprints and bumps that the cupcakes would be. So he would jack up the butter with a ton of sugar in there, and then they were easier to package. For the longest time, we made Swiss buttercream in my bakeries. That's what we made. That's what I liked. That's what I wanted to serve. And it was like Sisyphus, I couldn't get people to understand that Swiss buttercream is delicious. They want American buttercream. So that's what we make now. It's American buttercream. They just didn't want it, and it's loose and it's smooth and it's silky and it's beautiful. And people just didn't want it. They wanted American buttercream.
Okay, well, we'll have to start, I think, a move towards Swiss buttercream from now on. From now on, I'm on your side. But let's talk a bit, before we go on to, let's have a decision to decide if Amelia Simmons is going to be in this culinary pantheon because of unleashing the hellscape of cupcake trend on us. And I think that should be held against her.
It is.
Despite the fact she had an amazing title for her book. Let's just talk about this, because a lot of people ask me how these trends start. And we've seen it a lot in baking, possibly more than any other food stuff, whether it's people standing in line for a cronut, people standing in line, for cupcakes, and people used to stand in line for hours and hours, or whether we've seen it with food trucks and people going and standing in line. That's not so much dessert based. Why do you think people, and it tends to start from the United States, what is it, do you think, about kind of the American culture and kind of trend setting about America that makes particularly younger people kind of want to go for that? I'm asking you a psychological question now, but I'm just interested in what you think.
I think that a large part of it is social media, right? And baked things tend to be cute, right? Tacos tend to be cute. You can make sort of cute things, snackable things for snackable content. Hate that word, snackable. Snackable. Ugh.
Yeah, that's definitely, don't do a book called Snackable.
No, I won't. But that, I think that is one of the things. You get a beautiful donut that's been, covered in Captain Crunch cereal. Something like that. It just sounds so good. That's the kind of thing. You put that on Instagram, all of a sudden everyone's like, "Oh, I want the donut with the cereal on it. It sounds great." So I think that's one thing of it. But I think beyond that, I think that, especially Britain and America, we just have, there's something about baking that is very nostalgic. And even if it's not actually nostalgic for somebody, if somebody came from a family where they didn't do a lot of baking, but it feels nostalgic, and there's something just comforting about the fact that this was a thing that took a process to produce, nothing really sort of there's a different kind of warm feeling you get from a good steak, right? But there's something about, baking a loaf, baking a muffin, something that just, it feels like we are taking a bite of a time and a place that just feels better than where we are right now.
I think right now that's definitely the truth. And I bake bread, and trust me, my bread would probably make Ugg, who we mentioned, or Og, as we mentioned earlier, very unhappy. But I still go at it in my process, and I like having fun doing it because it is that process of actually doing something. It's why I spend so much time, apart from the fact that's what we do for a living. I spend so much time just in the kitchen now because it's the one place I feel kind of safe in this kind of crazy world. Mm-hmm. Now, okay, let's talk about whether we're going to allow Amelia Simmons, because you could be someone who has created the greater good, but you unleash, it's like, Pandora's box. You unleash horror on the world. I have a problem. At least you didn't create the rainbow bagel, under which case we'd have just stopped the interview right now. Yeah. You'd have gone home. I'd have made you go and stand in the corner in shame. But I'm tempted not to allow her in, Although she probably didn't know she was going to be responsible.
I want to make a case for Amelia.
Okay, go on, make a case.
A couple of things. First of all, she was an extraordinary woman. So Amelia Simmons, she was an orphan, and she was basically uneducated. She was a domestic. She worked in somebody's house. She was a cook, and the fact that she was able to, in the 1700s, 1600s, 1700s, she was able to gather the resources and take the time to actually write a cookbook and have the presence of mind to sounds like understand sort of historically where she was. I think to me is really amazing. I think that the world was stacked against her, and she wrote this book, and it was really well received. It sold really, really well for 50, 75 years, and then other people started writing cookbooks. But I mean, this was the first American cookbook, and I think it's in the Library of Congress. Library of Congress designated as one of 80 books that shaped America. And I think that's pretty great. Yeah. I think that's pretty great. And I just, there's something about this was a time of, huge change. I mean, the colonies are crazy and there was a lot going on, and this was a new, exciting time, for people. And I feel like this book, Amelia Simmons' book, was almost like a culinary Declaration of Independence. I think that this was something where she was like, okay, England, thanks for all the techniques that we got here. Thanks for teaching it, all these things that we've sort of, we've learned from cooking and baking in the old country. But we're in America, and here we don't use oats, you weirdos. We're using corn, and so, she was taking all these British techniques and making American things with it. And I think that right there, it just sort of like, it was like the delicious side of the Declaration of Independence, which I think is pretty cool.
No, it is. And, my half American side now, he says, has to agree. The other half of me is obviously shaking my fist at you in anger, but because you've won the battle. So Amelia Simmons, she enters the culinary pantheon, the Eat My Globe culinary pantheon.
I think another thing about Amelia,
you've already won. You don't need to keep.
I need to make sure, because I feel like you're not convinced. But so Amelia Simmons was the first sort of proponent of using a chemical leavening agent. So in the old country, there were either things were leavened by either sourdough, yeast, or mechanically leavened with air. So Amelia was using this stuff called pearl ash. Yes. Pearl ash, which was a precursor to baking soda. And, I think that's very exciting. I think she also invented the word cookies.
Wow.
Yeah.
You should have come in with that at the beginning. I don't think we'd have needed the last 15 minutes of argument. I'd have gone, yep, because I love me a cookie.
And on top of that, I think what's also really exciting, now my culinary alma mater is the Culinary Institute of America. And I went to the one in Napa Valley in St. Helena. The original is in Hyde Park, New York. And it sounds like that's where she was from. Now, the book was really big in New England, but a lot of the terms and a lot of the terms, a lot of her glossary used a lot of Dutch words. And so a lot of people think that she was from the Hudson Valley. And so I think it's pretty exciting to think that the very first American cookbook came from an author from the Hudson Valley, which is now the home of the Culinary Institute of America. I like that.
You've won. You've won. I am battered, and I am on the ground, and you have defeated me very much like the War of Independence. So there you go. We've come back. We've gone back in history. Thanks very much. Now, talking of leavening with air, I think that takes us into your next suggestion, because I think we've got someone here who, if well, you tell us, because who you've got next, and we can talk about something that I think is one of America's great contributions to the world, as opposed to what we just talked about, and a really remarkable lady, but also from a very American culture, and I think created. So why don't you start us off? And I've done some research on this as well, and I'm really excited to talk about this.
So Maria Anna Fisher, she lived from 1819 to 1911 in Philadelphia, I believe, right? And she sold biscuits. She sold biscuits for 12.5 cents a pop, and eventually was able to buy a 14-room house in Philadelphia. She bought a lot of other property all over Philadelphia and rented rooms out and stuff, and gave a bunch of money to charity, and never in her entire life raised the price of her biscuits. They were always 12.5 cents.
And that's one of the things about her that I really love, because she saw this just as something she did. Just to give some background about her to people who may not have heard about her, and you do have to go, and this is the kind of person I love to have in the Eat My Globe culinary pantheon, so there's no argument here. The moment I read about her is she was an African-American. She was, as far as I can tell, and it's hard to find, freeborn. Mm-hmm. So she started selling these biscuits. She was an entrepreneur. And in that stage, you're talking about an African-American woman in the United States at the beginning of the 19th century, becoming an entrepreneur. And she started... 14. Yeah, she was, very, very young. And we don't know much about the rest of her life, because often people didn't necessarily write about African-American women of that period with the depth that we've got. So very little. But she started, as you said, selling these biscuits, and she sold them to the point that when she died, she had $70,000, which is a colossal amount of money. She'd bought other houses all over the United States. But what I thought was interesting here, and maybe we could talk about this, two sides. One, I'd like to talk about the baking side, because obviously that's who you are, and to talk about the biscuit and the scone and the origins of biscuits, which I found out came from. We'll talk about that. And the second side is to talk about the African-American influence on particularly Southern cooking initially, but the United States, because I think it's been obviously a profound one. And there's another person I'm going to mention here who actually they found out was the first African-American woman to publish a cookbook in the United States, and was actually was a pastry chef, and she ran a pastry shop. So perhaps let's talk about biscuits first. Sure. And let's talk about your kind of why biscuits, to me, I think a really great biscuit. And you talked about leavening with air, which is one of the things that they did. And then they used that pearl ash to leaven them as well. Mm. And where biscuits came from, I don't know how much you've talked about the history, and then I can tell you the little bit that I found out.
Well, the best biscuits are flaky and fluffy, right? It's nice when you can take a biscuit and sort of pull it apart a little bit and kind of see leaves, right? Not in the sense that you would see it like with puff pastry, but it's kind of the same concept. And now when I make a biscuit, I actually do fold my dough over, which a lot of people don't do, because I really want to make sure that I get some leaves in there. You don't want to do it too much because you start getting chewy biscuits. But the best biscuits, are real, they're fluffy, but they can also kind of come apart. Now, don't hate me, but personally, I think one of the best biscuits in America, Popeye's biscuits.
Oh, I'm not going to hate you.
That is a fantastic biscuit. Really buttery and salty on the outside, and really kind of crispy, then really soft in the middle, and it comes apart. Those are delicious biscuits.
Can I throw in my favorite? See, when people ask me about my favorite of that kind of fast foody, I love me a Bojangles biscuit.
Oh, Bojangles. Well,
I love me a Bojangles biscuit. I love them. I don't know what it is. There's something about them. It may be the salt content or the butter. I don't know what it is, but I love biscuits. Now, I come from Britain, where we still argue about whether we say scone or scone. I say scone, which was the kind of upper class way of saying it. Scone was the lower class way of saying it. but I was just brought up saying scone. And they're very different, but people often try to, because they look similar.
Yeah, but they're really not the same thing. Really not.
What I've heard, and I don't know if you know about this story, is that the biscuit, they both obviously come from, obviously biscuit in Britain is something very different. It's like a harder version of a cookie. Right. And they both come from the Latin in biscottus, which meant twice cooked. Yeah, it comes from the Latin, that they used to make in Rome things with bread, and they would cook them twice to make them hard so they could be transported. And on Royal Navy ships and the ships that they would have brought over on things like the Mayflower and other ships, they would have these biscottus or hard tack, they call them biscuits, that they would eat off. They would break them, they would dip them into soup. But they used some yeast in them. When they came to the United States, they didn't have yeast, or certainly they didn't have a great deal of yeast. There might have been some wild yeast they weren't bringing. And so they started using leavening with air and then leavening with pearl ash. Mm-hmm. And they began to rise. So you have one comes from the other. And this is the theory that I've kind of discovered, as it were, out there. I don't know whether that makes sense to you from a baking point of view.
Well, I mean, yeast is everywhere, right? It's on everything. It's on my face. I mean, yeast is everywhere. So it's not like they didn't know how to harvest yeast, but I think it could have been just we had a different palate, And I think that maybe we just didn't like things as sort of sour, as funky, and so we wanted something that was, a little lighter. Maybe we had worse teeth, I don't know, like scones. I feel like scones are like hardtack. Scones are they're harder than biscuits.
They shouldn't be too dense, but they should be more crumbly rather than flaky.
Yeah, I feel like, like scones, like you have to dip them in tea or something,
Or jam and cream.
Yeah,
the Cornish way.
Like biscuits. Yeah, I love biscuits. I don't love scones. Yeah.
I'm a big scone fan, but then I was obviously brought up that way. Right. But let's before we get into another argument, one of the things I wanted to talk about with Maria Anna Fisher is obviously she comes from the African American community. And I think it's worth recognizing, as we like to do on Eat My Globe, the contribution of African Americans to American cuisine as the way we see it now. I mean, right now, people are falling in love with kind of new Southern cooking. Well, most of that is, or certainly a huge amount of that is informed by African Americans. And I think in the pastry area, we've talked about France, of course, which in many ways is kind of the spiritual home of great pastries anyway. But in terms of comfort and domestic, I think a lot of it comes from the African-American community, and I wanted to know your view. So until fairly recently, people thought that the earliest cookery books were written in the 1860s by African-American women, the first African-American cookbook. Again, and love a full load of words here. A domestic cookbook containing a careful selection of thoughtful recipes for the kitchen by a Mrs. Melinda Russell, an experienced cook. And so she was a woman who was born free, again, who traveled all over the country, but for a long time ran a pastry shop. And so in there are recipes for biscuits, there are recipes for tarts, there are recipes for pies across. And what's really interesting about her is these weren't recipes that she necessarily learned in kitchens of plantations. These were ones that she'd developed herself, and she'd been to pastry school. She'd done all kinds of really interesting things. So I just thought that was interesting because it tied in with Maria Anna Fisher as well. You see these African-American women as entrepreneurs, which is not something that we necessarily think about so much when we think about that period. And I wondered just if you had any thoughts about kind of, you've experienced the kind of African-American contribution in some of the dishes you've tasted, some of the things you've eaten down south, you've mentioned Virginia, some of the things that you find down there that you kind of have made an impact on.
Well, certainly biscuits, and also certainly cornbread. Cornbread's just a staple, a Southern staple. My first fine dining job, I wanted to be a chef. I went in. I was like, I want to work here. And the chef took a look at my resume, and it was like McDonald's and Burger King and a pizza place. And she's like, "You don't know how to cook." I was like, "Come on, I know how to cook." And she's like, "I'll tell you what, I'm gonna teach you how to bake cornbread and biscuits." And I did that for 2 years, bake cornbread and biscuits. and I got real good at it. But it was the restaurant itself was called Savannah. Now it's called Charleston. It moved, but it's kind of a like really fancy low country, cuisine. So shrimp and grits, collard greens. All like the menu itself is very, very southern, but really, really awesome, like delicious. I think one of my favorite things that I learned how to make there was a bene seed biscuit. Now, bene seeds are I guess it's like an American sesame seed. They're like sesame seeds, just a little bit smaller, and you would make a roll. So you would make a dough, and it would have a lot of cheese in it, a ton of cheese and all these seeds.
Oh, wow!
And you would roll it up and roll it up in plastic wrap, and you'd refrigerate it so it got really cold, and then you would slice it into these, they're a little bit bigger than a quarter, and but thick, probably maybe a third of an inch thick, and then you would slice them up and bake them off, and they just super buttery little cheesy crackers. They were delicious.
Oh my gosh, the thought of that just makes me so happy. Tell me again the name.
Bene seed, Benne.
I'm going to have to go and look that up and find out what those are. What I love about this podcast is when we have people on who we're interviewing, there's always something I had no idea about. And I like to think of myself as a fairly well-read person who goes out there and studies. And then you've just introduced me to something that I've got to go and find. And I've got to go and find someone who makes them. So, now the only other person I was going to mention in here is, if I was to ask you may not know this because I didn't until I went and did my little research. Alexander P. Ashburn. Have you ever heard that name?
Does not ring a bell.
He's potentially one of those people who could come in on the back of Maria Anna Fischer. In 1875, he patented the first biscuit cutter. So there you go.
Wow. Amazing.
So I again, this is why we call it things you didn't know, because you don't need to know this, but now you know it. It's better that you do.
Yeah, so absolutely.
Okay, number five.
Now I actually had the joy of learning how to make this dish from this man's sous chef.
Wow.
Yes.
Okay.
He was very old. But Paul Blanche from Brennan's in New Orleans, who invented the bananas Foster.
One of my favorite dishes. And I will tell you that everyone sitting in this room, including my lovely wife, Sybil, who you know, and our producer, April, we have eaten that dish in Brennan's together when we've been on a food research trip to New Orleans and had them make it. And it is one of those great theatrical... I love food served at the table.
Totally.
Before all of this pandemic stuff, when people could get close to people, I wanted to open a restaurant called Garridon, where every single thing was served at the table, from a cocktail at the beginning to even the napkin being warmed at the end to wipe your hands. And so everything in between. I would never have got any money to do it, but Bananas Foster to me... you tell people what Bananas Foster is in case anyone out there hasn't tried it.
Okay, so Bananas Foster is... it's bananas chopped up and fried in butter, brown sugar, and Cointreau. And then, fry, served in a dish with vanilla ice cream. And then the sauce kind of spooned over top of it.
It is, as a dish, it's one of my favorites. It's perfection, with that hot and cold of the ice cream, the sauce dribbling over the ice cream. I mean, if you like that experience, to me, it's the best. But for me, two things. One is, as I said, is the tableside service, which I think makes everyone in the place want to have it. And the second is, this dish is one of those great examples that we get throughout culinary history of people naming dishes after people. Mm. And we see them in Delmonico's lobster Newburgh. We see it with Escoffier. We see, chicken a la king. We see all kinds.
Caesar salad.
So Caesar salad is a perfect one that we all eat every day, or people certainly eat a great deal. What about desserts? Let's think. Can you tell me, because I'm going to put this person in there anyway because bananas foster. I mean, you can't argue. I think there's no
classic. It's delicious. It's perfect. Just the history of it. I mean, New Orleans, Port City. You get all these bananas. They were coming up from the tropics. They didn't last very long. Those bananas. We had to do something with them. They had a ton of bananas, and they figured out some really, really good dishes to do with them. Also, Hummingbird Cake was another one of those sort of I think originated in Charleston, South Carolina, and also Port City, and they had all these bananas. What do we do with them? They made Hummingbird Cake.
Oh my gosh, I've never had hummingbird cake, so there you go. Even more, I've learned. The thing I love about Paul Blanche is he kind of created the dish with Mrs. Brennan, but not at Brennan's. So they actually created it before Brennan's, I think, even opened. It was called The Carré, was the restaurant that they were at when they invented it. And then they moved over and they had Brennan's and the whole breakfast at Brennan's thing, which is one of the great things to do if you go to New Orleans. And never, I will say this now. I think New Orleans is the greatest eating city in the United States, bar none. You have to work really hard to eat badly in New Orleans. You have to work really hard. And I'm a cocktail drinker, so cocktails as well. But let's talk, I challenged you just to bolster putting Monsieur Blanche into our culinary pantheon. Can you name any other great dishes of desserts that are named for people?
What about a pavlova?
Created by Escoffier.
Right? For a ballet dancer?
Yeah. Hannah Pavlova.
Right.
A ballet dancer. Okay. So what do you think about this notion then of naming dishes after people? Have you named dishes after people?
I never have. Well, no, actually, no, that's not true. So when I started Charm City Cakes, what I would do is I would make a cake for somebody, for their wedding, and then I would take a picture of it and I would put it in sort of our book of cakes. And what I would do is I would name each cake the bride's maiden name. Would be the
oh, that's lovely.
And so then they would come in and be like, oh yeah, that was back when I was Julia Iddings. This is the Iddings cake. That was a real cake, by the way. It had dogwoods all over it. But yeah, so all the cakes were named after the brides.
I think that's a really, really lovely idea. And even if I had dismissed some of the people you suggested, I would now put them back in because I think that's a really charming idea from Charm City Cake. So. Okay, so I'm going to ask you now, because it's my show and I can do this. Yeah. If you had to make a dish and it was the Simon Majumdar, or the blah blah Simon, or the blah blah, well, not Majumdar, you wouldn't have enough icing. But if it was blah blah Simon, what would it be?
Okay, the Majumdar.
Don't say something dark and bitter.
I think it would be. I think it would. So what I would do is I would make a puff pastry, but I would season it with a little cardamom.
Ooh,
a little cardamom, and then I would probably have a few. I would probably do a base of puff pastry, some kind of cream, maybe with some mangoes and like a mango rum cream, and then I would probably do really thin leaves. So I would do some leaves of phyllo dough, and I think I would probably bake, kind of layer them up, and I would probably put like a nice little like pistachio streusel in between all the layers. So then I would top it with some kind of like a rum raisin ice cream or something.
Oh yeah, my
rum
favorite.
Raisin, a little gold leaf. So yeah, so a cardamom puff pastry, mango rum creme chaboost, and then leaves of pistachios, leaves of phyllo dough with pistachio, and then rum raisin ice cream and a little bit of gold leaf, because that dessert is interesting and complex and worth getting to know.
Excellent. A great answer. Now I'm going to, hopefully we'll have some more fun. I have 3 questions that I ask people at the end before I then ask you to share all of your knowledge and how people can find you and all about your books and everything else. So are you up for this little bit of a challenge?
All right, I'm up.
Let's do it. Now, if you were a baked good, what would it be?
Oh.
Or it could be a baking implement also.
I was a baked good. I think I'd be like you know what I'd be? I'd be like a good loaf of like a German sour rye bread. You know? Because I'm just like sort of stout, you know, but I'm real dependable. I'm always there. You know what I mean? I'm sort of a plow horse, you know? I kind of just get the job done no matter what it is. So I feel like I'd be a good loaf of dark sour rye.
Great answer, and I love a nice sour rye.
Me too.
I'm very happy.
The show that I just wrapped, the AD was from Lithuania, and
I love it.
Yeah, we were talking about Lithuania, and you know, we were talking about the food, obviously, and you know, he's saying how much he like, oh, I love the bread. I just missed the bread, and I made him 3 loaves of a dark Lithuanian, a bunch of caraway and pretzel salt on the top. But I had it going for about like 8 days. It got real sour. It's just it's delicious.
I'll give you a little tip that I picked up when I was in Lithuania. In all the bars, they actually take the crusts, if they don't use the crust from the bread, and they deep fry them, and they serve them in a little twist and put when you have a beer.
Make you thirsty. You drink more beer.
Yeah, it's salted, and it's so good because it's this amazingly sour rye that you have with your beer. It's amazing. Okay, if you could select any single meal or any period in history in which to experience a meal, what would it be?
You know what I want? I would want to have a meal in Genghis Khan's yurt. Like a big with all the generals and everybody there, a big Genghis feast, roasted meat and fermented mare's milk, you know, and everybody just, you know, drinking kumis. And what's the other one? The kumis, and there's another Mongolian gross alcohol.
I've been and I've spent time in Mongolia, and I've stayed overnight in yurts, and and when you first go into a yurt, the first thing that you have to do is on the side of the tent is a big bag made out of a stomach, a cow's stomach or a yak stomach, and that's where they put the milk every morning when they milk it you mix it when you come in, and part of your kind of thank you for being invited for dinner, as it were, is you kind of mix it 80 times, and you have to mix it, and then you say thank you, and then they give you a big bowl, and this milk has 5% alcohol content, and actually Mongolians can sometimes, some of them have the very high levels of cirrhosis because of the alcohol content of this fermented milk.
Yeah,
but it's an amazing country. You would love it when you go.
Go. It's always captivated my imagination, and I feel like a meal with Genghis Khan and all those guys in a big yurt I bet it was awesome. I bet it was.
When you go outside of the Ulaanbaatar, it immediately just becomes wilderness, and you've never felt more alone in the nicest sense. Solitary, and it's incredible. I'll send you. So I've got some incredible pictures of the people just flying their eagles off the mountains in the morning and riding along, on horseback with no saddles, in the morning, standing up as they're riding, because they're just, they're built with the horse, as it were.
Yeah.
Incredible. Okay. Finally, in the fun question, what would you consider to be the most important food invention in history?
I would say probably pasteurization.
Okay, love that.
Now, I don't know. Here's the thing. I'm a Luddite, right? I like cooking meat on fire. I don't like computers. I don't like phones. I like banging drums and roasting things, and I think pasteurization on the one hand has made so much food available to so many people, which it's, I think a really important, an important invention in just the world of, food and, the people that consume it. But, also detrimental, I think, to a lot of flavor and a lot of, eating what's around us as opposed to anything we want, so I think it's a double-edged sword, but I think the good outweighs the bad.
I think that's a great suggestion. So that is definitely in there. So now, before we let you go, and first of all, I just have to say thank you. I know how busy you are right now. You've been filming. You have you have a little one on the way. I know how much you've got going on. So for you to take the time to do this, to share your knowledge with everyone and your experience and just your charm, is something really special. So I want to say how much I appreciate it.
This is my favorite podcast, and I'm not just saying that. It truly is. I love this podcast. I listen to a few. I got a few. There's some. There's one called what is it? It's called Disgraceland. It's just bad. It's rock stars behaving badly. Right? It's
I need
stories about it's really good. That's a good one. There's a couple other randoms I listen to, but sometimes you listen to a podcast, you listen to it, you're like, that one was okay. I have never listened to an episode of Eat My Globe and I've been like, that was all right. Every single time I learn so much. So thank you.
Well, you've definitely this time contributed so much. So thank you. So if people wanted to follow you on all the social medias, I'm sure there's plenty of them anyway, but a lot of people who listen to this, if they don't, they should follow you. And also, if they want to contact you, if there's books, anything you want to tell us.
Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, all that stuff is just Duff Goldman. The bakery is Charm City Cakes. So if there's an event that I'm going to be at, it'll usually be on Charm City Cakes. My personal ones, there's business stuff, but it's usually just look at this bug that I found in my backyard. I don't know if you follow me, but it's not about there are cakes, it's a lot of baking stuff, but it's a lot of other stuff too, and then let's see, I have a brand new book just came out called Super Good Baking for Kids. It is not just for kids.
It really isn't. I've got a copy. I love it.
Yeah. I just there's something about all these kids cooking books that I just felt were really just pedestrian. I don't know, elementary. They were, I think they I work with kids every day and I know what they're capable of. I see them making pâte à choux. I see them making gâteau Saint-Honoré and they're 11 years old. And I'm like, they can handle what's in here. There's yeast and donuts. There is a Blitz puff in there. There's, there's deep frying. There's decorated cakes. There's a lot of stuff that, adults that have never baked will love this book. It's really good.
Fantastic. Well, everyone should go and check out. If you're not following Duff, go and do that straight away. And that's it. Thank you so much, Duff. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you very much.
Do make sure to check out the website associated with this podcast at www.eatmyglobe.com, where we will be posting the transcripts from each episode, along with all the references and resources we use putting the episodes together, in case you want to delve deeper into each subject. There is also a contact button, so please do let us know if there are any subjects that you would like us to cover. And if you like what you hear, please don't forget to subscribe, recommend us to your family and friends, and give us a good rating on your favorite podcast provider. That really makes a difference. Thank you, and goodbye from me, Simon Majumdar, and we'll speak to you soon on the next episode of Eat My Globe, a podcast about things you didn't know about food. The Eat My Globe podcast is a production of It's Not Much But It's Ours and Producergirl Productions, and is created with the kind cooperation of the UCLA Department of History. We would especially like to thank Professor Carla Pastana, the Department Chair of the Department of History, and Dr. Tawny Paul, Public History Initiative Director, for their notes on this episode. Also, a huge thank you to Sybil Villanueva for her help with the research and the preparations of the transcripts for this episode, which can be found on the website.